Wilson here again, and then in today's video I'm going to be talking about Unit 12, which is excretion. Excretion is the removal of waste substances of metabolism from an organism's body. These include toxic materials and substances in excess of need. These include carbon dioxide, excess water and salts, urea, and biopigments. Now, sometimes students get confused with excretion and egestion. Egestion is the removal of undigested materials, such as cellulose, from plants through the anus, which is the end of the alimentary canal, and out of the body. Now, excretion is the removal of waste substances of metabolism, that is, from respiration. Egestion is the removal of undigested materials in the alimentary canal. Now, we animals produce nitrogenous wastes. Now, these are wastes that contain nitrogen in them. These are made from excess proteins and amino acids by the liver. The name for all these waste substances is called urea, and the process which the body gets rid of extra proteins and amino acids to form urea is called deamination. Now, all of this is done by the kidney. Now, the kidney is a very, very important organ in the body, as it does a lot of very, very important jobs that help us to keep us alive. Well, that's all very obvious. Now, here are the 10 functions of the liver. The first one is that the liver converts excess amino acids into urea and carbohydrates in a process called deamination. The second one is that the liver synthesizes plasma proteins such as fibrinogen from amino acids. The third one is that the liver controls the amount of glucose in the blood with the aid of hormones, insulin, and glucagon. The fourth one is that the liver stores carbohydrates as the polysaccharide glycogen. The fifth one is that it makes bile, which is a digestive juice that contains enzymes to break down the food we eat. The sixth one is that the liver breaks down old red blood cells. Now, red blood cells have an average lifespan about 4 months. Now, when they die, they get carried to the liver, which then breaks it down into biopigments and is excreted along with in the feces. The seventh one is that it breaks down harmful substances such as alcohol. Now, when pathogens and toxins get inside the body, it is the liver's job to see them removed and disarmed, basically. Well, yeah. The eighth one is that the liver also stores vitamins A, B, D, E, and K. It also stores potassium. And the last one is that it makes cholesterol, which is needed to make and repair cell membranes. Here is a picture of how urea is made. Now, this is a picture literally taken from the biology textbook, but I couldn't find any other picture online that is as clear, as simple as this one. So I'm going to start explaining this. The first step is basically protein in the food that we eat is taken into the alimentary canal. The second one is that the protein molecules are broken down by enzymes into amino acids during digestion. The third one is that the amino acids are absorbed into the blood and taken to the liver to detoxify them, as I've explained earlier. That's one of the functions of the liver. Now, the fourth step is that amino acids that are needed are released into the circulation after detoxification by the liver. Now, these amino acids get carried around to all the cells in the body, which the cells then joins them to make proteins. Now, the fifth one is that amino acids that are not needed are deaminated into carbohydrates and ammonia. So basically, these are the amino acids that have we eaten in excess, and the carbohydrates, which are as a product of deamination, are stored or either released or stored by the liver. Because these carbohydrates, though it may seem that now they are not needed, they might be needed in the future. So why not just store them instead of getting rid of them? Now, the ammonia is the main product that is used to form urea. And here comes the seventh step, because I've already explained the sixth step, which is the liver release some of the carbohydrates into circulation as well as storing some of them. Now the seventh step is that the ammonia from deamination is converted into urea. And then, in the eighth step, the urea to be secreted and the amino acids to be used by the body and taken away by the blood. That's basically how urea is formed. And here are three pictures of the human excretory system. The first picture on the top left-hand corner is basically like a whole view of the system. These includes the vena cava and the aorta, along with the renal vein and the renal artery, with two kidneys, with the ureter, the bladder, and the urethra. The second picture, which is a vertical section through the kidney, shows the medulla, which is the part directly connected to the pelvis, and on the outside, which is the cortex. Now, the cortex is where nephrons begin. Now, these nephrons are tiny, tiny parts of the liver that makes up the liver, and it is where the reabsorption and filtration takes place. Now, I think that you guys have all dissected pig's kidney. Now, you have all seen what the medulla looks like, what the cortex looks like. If you have the chance, you might also see what the pelvis and the ureter looks like, and also the nephron as well. And the last picture here is basically the structure of a nephron. You can see that the yellow part is basically the kidney tubule, which the filtered blood will pass along and then eventually turn into urine. Now, wrapped around these tubules are tiny, tiny blood capillaries. Now, these are used for reabsorption of the nutrients back into the blood. And here is basically how urine forms. Now, blood is filtered as it passes through the kidneys. This removes all the urea, all the glucose, and excess water and salts. Now, proteins and amino acids cannot be filtered into the kidney because they are too big, right? As it moves along the kidney tubule, all the glucose, along with some of the water and salts, are absorbed back into the blood, into the tiny blood capillaries that are wrapped around the tubules. Now, the amount of urine produced is adjusted by the kidneys. Now we're going to go back to this, and I'm going to explain this using the picture here. Now, you can see that there's a very, very big red circle in the middle of the picture. Now, that is where the renal capsule meets the glomerulus. Now, the renal capsule, also known as a Bowman's capsule because of its shape, is shaped like a cup, and there are tiny, tiny holes on them. Now, inside the capsule is a tangle of blood capillaries known as the glomerulus. Now, the blood pressure in the glomerulus is very, very high because the glomerulus is very, very thin, whilst the artery that takes the blood to the glomerulus is very, very wide. Now, the high blood pressure presses the blood and the glomerulus tightly against the Bowman's capsule. Now, this helps substances in the blood to be filtered into the kidney. Now, after the blood has been filtered, which into the tubule, it contains all the glucose, urea, and some water and some salts. Now, this moves around along the tubule. It first moves around the loop of Henle, which is this U-shaped loop here, and around them is tiny, tiny blood capillaries. Now, after filtration, here's where gradual reabsorption takes place. Now, by the time the liquid in the tubule reaches the collecting duct, it's basically a solution of water, some salts, and all of the urea. Now, reabsorption reabsorbs all the glucose and some of water and some of the salts back into the blood because glucose is needed for respiration, therefore are very, very important to the body. Now, the kidneys are very, very sufficient at reabsorbing water. Over 99% of the water entering the tubules is reabsorbed. In humans, the two kidneys filters about 170 dm cubed of water per day, yet only about 1.5 of them are excreted as urine. And then after the urine is collected in the collecting duct, it flows into the pelvis, which then flows into the ureter, and this ureter carries the urine down into the bladder, which then it is stored there. Now, leading out of the bladder is a tube called the urethra, which from there the urine is excreted out of the body. Now, sometimes students get confused with ureters and urethra. Now, ureters is the tube that leads out of the kidney and connects to the bladder, whilst the urethra leads out of the bladder, and it is where urine is excreted. Now, sometimes a person's kidneys may fail, which means that they do not work anymore. Now, there are two solutions to be precise, in treating this. The first one is kidney dialysis. Now, this is basically letting a machine to do all the filtration and reabsorption for you. Now, the patient's blood is leaded out of its body and passed into a dialysis machine. Now, in this machine, it is where filtration and reabsorption takes place. Now, patients need to be treated 2 or 3 times a week, and the treatment lasts for several hours. Here's a picture of a dialysis machine. As you can see, the red tube leads the patient's blood out of the body, and then you can see around the bottom left-hand corner here is a pump that keeps the blood from flowing, and then the blood is flown into the dialysis machine. Now, in here, the blood is flown into many tiny tubes, which the material is made out of a semi-permeable membrane, something like a viscine tubing. Now, flowing around these tubes are the dialysis fluid. Now, in this fluid, it contains all the substances needed to basically get all the urea out and make sure that all the glucose are not lost. So basically, the dialysis fluid can be adjusted according to the patient's need. For example, there is no urea in the dialysis fluid, so the urea diffuses out of the patient's blood and into the fluid. The amount of other substances in the blood can be regulated by controlling the concentration in the dialysis fluid. For example, the protein in the blood remains there as it's too big to pass, and the concentration of glucose in the dialysis fluid is kept the same as the concentration in the patient's blood. Now, a lot of patients prefer to do a kidney transplant instead of doing this, because this is a very difficult method, because it requires you to go to a hospital and just sit there for like 3 or 4 hours doing nothing to just let the machine filter your blood out. Now, kidney transplants have advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is that it is quick, safe, and simple. Now, surgeons nowadays can almost always make an excellent job of removing an old organ and replacing it with a better one. The big problem comes afterwards. The patient's immune system recognizes the donor organ as being foreign and attacks it. This is called rejection. Now, in order to stop this, the patient is given immunosuppressants, which are drugs that limits the functions of the immune system, which decreases the chance of rejection. Now, these drugs have some very serious side effects because it also limits the immune system's job as a whole. So this may lead to the patient suffering from all sorts of other diseases after he or she have taken these drugs. Now, these drugs have to be taken for the rest of the patient's life. And also, the chances of rejection are reduced if the donor is a close relative of the recipient, which is the person receiving the kidney. The donor is the person who is donating the kidney to other people. Now, closely related people are more likely to have antigens on their cells, which are similar to each other. Okay, I'm gonna end this video here because this is just basically everything in the syllabus, and then I've made it quite straightforward, and I hope that you guys learned something from it. This is a really short, fairly short topic with not a lot of many things to learn, but you do need to know the kidney dialysis, how it works, as well as the advantages and disadvantages of kidney dialysis and kidney transplants. As well, you need to know how the liver basically filters the blood, as well as structure, is the name of its structure and stuff. The next video I'm going to do is on Unit 9, which is animal transport. Now, that unit is not long, but it has a lot of content in it, so I'm going to split that into 2 videos. Okay, I'm going to end here and see you guys there. Goodbye.